Silence is a tough act to follow. It's like that mindfulness. I studied with a great mindfulness teacher who said if you want to really experience total peace, clear your mind of all thoughts and focus right here on the center of yourself. And I did this. It absolutely worked. I'm now thoughtless and self-centered. So I'm two people. I'm Steve Bhaerman. I'm Swami Bhayandananda. Sometimes I channel the Swami. Today the Swami is channeling me. And what I'm going to talk about is my book with Bruce Lipton, Spontaneous Evolution. Who's heard of Bruce Lipton? Okay, very good. He is a brilliant cellular biologist who wrote a book called The Biology of Belief. And Biology of Belief talks about how our beliefs and perceptions, similar to what you said, Amy, about the law of attraction and how and manifestation. Our thoughts and beliefs are determine our biology, how our physiology works, and also how our life unfolds. And so spontaneous evolution has taken the ideas that Bruce developed in Biology of Belief and applying them to our collective beliefs. And if we look around at the world these days, particularly since the last so-called election, a lot of people are really in this dazed and confused, like what's going on? Is this the hand of God at work? Or just a middle finger? People are not sure about that. And so there's a multiplicity of crises. And for people who are paying attention, we see that there's environmental crisis, there's political crisis, there's economic crisis, and really, fundamentally, there's spiritual crisis. And the spiritual crisis is, are we really connected to that oneness, or have we fallen into the delusion of separation? So my talk today is going to be called Spontaneous Evolution, a Universal Love Story. And I think it's going to put what's going on right now in perspective. So Bruce, being a cellular biologist, having studied evolution, he says that crisis precipitates evolution. And if we look around at these crises, we see that the chances of precipitation are 100%. And we need to recognize that all of these things that are not working are really pushing us to a new emerging paradigm. The old paradigm that we lived by for 5,000 years, dominate or be dominated, is coming to an end because our species can't survive with that anymore. Bruce says that we are the next level of human evolution, should we make the choice, because it's conscious. Next phase of human evolution is recognizing that we're all cells in the same body of humanity. And if we look at what's going on in our world, we see that so much of human activity and how we spend our energy is really autoimmune dysfunction. We have healthy human cells fighting other healthy human cells, competing in the wrong way. The original meaning of the word competition, by the way, in Greek, it meant to strive together. So those Greek Olympian athletes weren't trying to beat the other guy. They were actually using the other performers as their pace car. Yeah. So we're striving together, each of us looking to achieve our full potential, our full excellence, in the context of other people trying to do the same. So as we look at how we need to realign our perceptions, our structures, and our behaviors, let's look at this universal love story. The universal love story is a story of life on this planet. And life began with a relationship. It started with a love relationship between Father, Son, and Mother Earth. And when the first photons, first beams of light interacted with the inorganic material on this planet, something magical happened. Life was born, something called photosynthesis, the interactivity between the sun energy and the matter on Earth. So the first act of this universal love story happened when life began on this planet billions of years ago. And life went on as single-cell organisms for billions of years. And then something interesting happened. Life was ready to get into a relationship. Perhaps the single cells got tired of being single. And, hey, let's connect. And we had the second act of this universal love story is you have the single cell organisms combining to become multi-cell organisms. And that went on for quite a while until the third act of this universal love story, which is hugely complex multi-cell organisms like you and me. We are a community of 50 trillion cells, believe it or not, and it seems to work just fine. We have a society that's thriving. We have universal health care, full employment, no cell left behind. And the organs actually cooperate with each other. You never read about the liver invading the pancreas, demanding the islets of Langerhans. It's just so we are an example of how nature organizes things in a field, and to the extent that we're happy and healthy and happy to be part of this group, we are thriving entities. The fourth act of this universal love story is that groups of individuals like ourselves form tribes. Animals form packs, they form flocks, they form herds, they form schools of fish. And that's the level of organization that we are on the planet right now. And we see how well that's working. The Greeks, back to the Greeks, they had a word for 4-act plays. Anybody know what those were? Tragedy. A 4-act play in Greek drama is a tragedy. But they had a 5-act play as well. Those were called comedies. Comedies. So you can look at the crucifixion, tragedy, resurrection, comedy. Comedy. Because there is an element of love and connection that's added at the end. So if we are to transform our current seemingly tragic circumstances into something we could all wholeheartedly laugh about, then we need to create this 5-act play, which involves becoming this organism, this superorganism called humanity, whereas I prefer calling it humankind, because human kindness is the currency of this. Now, we may not be seeing this right now in our lives, and these have been called apocalyptic times. And the meaning of apocalypse, interestingly enough, it means the lifting of the veils. The lifting of the veils, the revelation of secrets that have been kept secret, some because they've been toxic perpetrations, and some because they've been healing modalities that have been kept in protective custody until the right time. So in terms of the awful truths, we are now seeing these horrific revelations that are coming up about our own government's toxicity and involvement in all kinds of stuff. And we're seeing that in our own individual lives. How many people are having their shadow pieces come up, right? Of course, we don't have any shadow, right? But everybody else will tell us we do. And so all of these pieces are coming up for healing. And if we look at the face that's currently at the head of our government, if I have to be totally honest, I would say that we now have the appropriate face on what has been happening for a long, long time. Just as an illness, in order to be healed, has to come to the surface. It has to break through the skin. We have been in our country for the last 70 years. We've had a don't ask, don't tell policy. We promise not to ask our government what it's doing, and they promise not to tell us. And so in so many ways, it's very, very important for these things to come to the surface, because you can't heal what you can't see. And you have to be able to acknowledge all of these things. So we are at that point where these toxic perpetrations are being revealed. We can look forward to more of that. However, on the other side, we are cultivating more and more and more love, which allows us to metabolize all of the word is residue, from 5,000 years of living under the lowest common denominator, and the rule of gold rule, which overrules the rule of the golden rule, do unto others before they can do unto you. We've seen that, right? We've seen that. And so what's happening now is that all of these amazing modalities and techniques are being revealed, whether it's Ayurvedic or Chinese medicine, shamanic practices, the Kabbalah, the mystery schools of Christianity. Hopi elders, years ago, they said, all of these things we've been keeping secret, please use them now, because we need these tools in our toolkit in order to make the next passage. So another metaphor, and this was brought up earlier by Chuck. The other metaphor that we use in our book is the caterpillar transforming into the butterfly. Now, some of you may not know, the caterpillar in its lifetime consumes about 26,000 times its own weight in food. So all life being a metaphor, if we were to look at our so-called civilization, we've had a caterpillar civilization. We consume tremendous amounts. We live by planned obsolescence, and we're figuring that we can throw this away. There's a new one coming. Our entire economy is built on extraction and consumption. And so the caterpillar has been what we've been. We are now in that process of change. I saw this wonderful cartoon the other day, and there's a butterfly behind the wheel of a car who's been stopped by the cops. And he's handing over his license, and there's a picture of a caterpillar on the license. He's saying, it's an old photo. So what we're seeing in the news is a lot of old photos. We're seeing the collapse of the caterpillar. Inside the chrysalis, however, what happens is as the caterpillar deconstructs, there are these new cells that begin to pop up, and they're actually called imaginal cells, like imagination, imaginal cells. And as these imaginal cells emerge, they begin to connect with one another. And at first, there are not as many of them, and they kind of, the caterpillar devours them. If we were to look at our own civilization, in the 1960s, these first imaginal cells emerged as part of this transformational movement through consciousness expanding, use of substances and religion and spiritual paths, as well as these ideas that really we need to actually take what our founders of this country said, we're all created equal, and really bring that into fruition. And so these first imaginal cells began to stir and connect. And the caterpillar, as it has been constructed, has until now been able to thwart these cells. But the inevitability of evolution only moves in one direction. A caterpillar doesn't go, I changed my mind. I don't want to be a butterfly. I want to go back. It doesn't happen that way in nature. So regardless of what the process looks like, there is an inevitability of evolution. There's the inevitability of becoming this butterfly, which will enable us to fly higher and see from a higher perspective and recognize that we are not living in this Newtonian universe of equal and opposite forces, but rather we're living in an Einsteinian universe where everything is connected and related. So if you look at the news, it's all about the caterpillar. The imaginal cells are happening in rooms like this everywhere. It's where people begin to activate the two factors that bring evolution. Every phase of evolution has two things. Number one, it has connection and cooperation and community, because every phase of evolution has involved more and more and more entities becoming part of this oneness. And the second thing is awareness. Think about it this way. if you're a liver cell in the body, you don't have to worry about what the lungs are doing because that's all being taken care of. You're part of a larger organism that has shared awareness. Now, if we can imagine a healthy body politic, we can imagine communications where you don't try to lie and spin and misrepresent, but rather it's important that everybody have the best information. If you have an immune system, you want the immune system to have the most accurate information possible so that it attacks the right cells and not the wrong ones. And in our body politic these days, because we've been divided very clearly into tribes, the sociopathogens have taken over. And the sociopathogens have tried to convince us that their inhuman nature is our human nature. Our true human nature is love and connection. So again, if we really look at the conditions of the world with climate issues, with political issues, with all of these things, one might imagine that we need a miracle. We need a miracle. And it turns out that there is a template for miracles. Did you notice a template for miracles? The template for miracles is called spontaneous remission. Now, we all know people, and maybe there's some people like this in this room, who were essentially handed a death sentence by the medical establishment. Whatever you have can't be cured, and just go home and make the best of what time you have. And some people, for some reason, end up clearing that condition and being perfectly fine. They call it spontaneous remission because they don't understand what it is that creates this change. So a doctor named Louis Mail Madrona, an MD, decided that he was going to interview people who experienced spontaneous remission. And he wrote a book called Coyote Medicine about what he found. And he found that in most, if not all of the cases of people who magically and miraculously healed themselves of these fatal conditions, he said he found that there was a change of story. A change of story. What does that mean? It means that there was something that precipitated the illness as a message. And when that message was received, and perhaps it was a message to not be in that job, not be in that location, not be in that relationship, not be in that mindset, most importantly, not be in that mindset. And that when people actually were able to discover and uncover what that coaching was, and they made the courageous change in the story that they were telling themselves, that there was a spontaneous healing that took place. So if we're looking for a template in our own so-called civilization and society about how we make this change, spontaneous remission can be precipitated by a spontaneous remissioning and changing our mission from the subconscious mission that we've learned since we were toddlers, that we are living in a world that when push comes to shove, it's either you or me. Think about this. How many people are familiar with kinesiology, muscle testing? Okay. Now imagine that you're testing the people who are activists in peace and environmentalism, and you test them. I believe we will have peace on earth. Doink. Muscle test weak. Why does the muscle test weak? Because all of our programming, our subconscious programming, and Bruce would tell us 95% of everything is subconscious. It's telling us that we can't do it, that we're a failed species, that we have original sin, and so on. And so part of our awareness now, part of our practice that Bruce and I recommend in our book, which you can get right out there, by the way, if you believe in the hereafter, I'll be hereafter signing books. And of course there's a no-lose proposition. If I become very famous, you'll have a famous autograph. If not, you'll have a rare book. So, and also Swami for Precedent, the political books down here. But the point that I'm making is that if we wake up every morning and practice three things. Evolutionary awareness, remembering we're all in this together, remembering that we're evolving to become this magnificent organism called humankind. Number two, evolutionary intention. What I do today is going to move forward that dream. And finally, evolutionary practice. Whatever it is that we do to heal the wound of separation inside of us and begin to do our work in the world for the betterment of all, and begin to connect with other people and recognize them as other holy cellular souls in this amazing adventure. So I get often asked, are we going to do it? Will we be able to do it? And the Swami will tell you he doesn't make predictions because he doesn't want to lose his nonprofit status. So in answer to the question, will we make it, one of the most brilliant things I ever heard was something uttered by that great philosopher and center fielder, Willie Mays. And he was being interviewed by Howard Cosell, the commentator. And I'll channel the interview for you so you'll get it. Right. We're talking with Willie Mays. Willie, let me ask you this. Are the Giants gonna win the pennant this year, Willie Mays? Willie Mays said, I don't know, Howard. That's what we're gonna play the season to find out. So here we are, imaginal cells in this new butterfly organism. Play ball, we're on a new field. Thank you.